Hi, and welcome to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm Ange MacCabe, CEO and co-founder of Intuitive Performance. I'm a performance coach, HR professional, whole person leadership facilitator, and your host. The Human Side of Business podcast is fueled by the genuine curiosity to understand how personal characteristics and skills can be leveraged to drive individual and team performance, tangible outcomes, and ultimately organizational success within business. Each podcast is devoted to sharing knowledge, expanding our learning edges, and exploring the trends in corporate culture towards growing the emotional intelligence of organizations. I'm so glad you're here. Welcome, Gustavo Razzetti. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. I'm really excited about our pre-conversation, so looking forward to the interview.
Yes, exactly. And everyone, I'd like to introduce you to our next guest, Gustavo Razzetti. With over 30 years in the industry, Razzetti has worked directly with leaders and organizations ranging from Fortune 500 startups, nonprofits, and everywhere in between. Gustavo Razzetti's forward-thinking ideas, tools, and books are really helping leaders and teams do the best work of their lives. His purpose is to help people and organizations overcome limitations and become the best versions of themselves. Gustavo Razzetti is the author of 4 business books on culture and teamwork, and his insights on workplace culture and remote teams have been featured in places like the New York Times, the BBC, Psychology Today, Forbes, and Fortune. How's that for an intro?
Wow. I'm impressed.
Where do I sign up is where I start. I'm really excited to dive in with you today, Gustavo, around the topic of culture of trust, transparency, and communications in a remote workplace. We know that over the past 2 years, there's been a lot of changes when it comes to our dynamic in the workplace, which also impacts those things like transparency, culture, trust, etc. So kind of walk us through a little bit of your background and where that's gotten you today with regards to really influencing businesses and individual teams to step into a place of culture, to step into a culture of trust and transparency in the remote workplace.
Yeah, sure. I always joke, but half jokingly, half seriously, that I'm trying to fix with teams and organizations, the mistakes I made when I was a former CEO, a former executive leader. And I think that no one prepares us to lead teams. When we go to business schools, we learn a lot about business strategy, etc. But culture and leadership are not necessarily one things that we learn a lot. And even if we were prepared, until you don't have to navigate those waters, you really don't know what you're doing. And it happened to me many times that basically I had to transform teams. I was hired to turn around a business, and I tried to change the culture too quickly and basically failed to read the signs and understand really what's the strength that company or team had. And one of the things that basically I tell my clients now, like when you're taking over a new team or a new company, I work with lots of companies that are either merging, acquiring businesses or growing really fast. One of the things that happens is that we are so focused into what we want to accomplish that we forget to celebrate and acknowledge what's working in the existing team. So I always like to talk about, it's not about changing the culture, it's about evolving. And that requires understanding what's working, getting rid of the things that aren't working, adding new stuff, but also accepting there are certain things that you're never going to be able to change, and you need to live with that.
I like where you're coming in from, in the sense that, your half joke around wanting to acknowledge the growth in yourself as a consultant or a leadership provider, in the sense that sometimes we move too fast when it comes to changing culture and understanding some of those nuances. Can we pause there just for a second and talk about that? I guess, what was the biggest learning in the sense of what flags you now look for into how fast or how slow or what exactly you need to do in the sense of shifting culture to a place of trust and transparency?
I think that the first thing it's about speed, and I think that leaders, when I was a leader or former leader, I was trying to impose my speed and try basically to bring the people to operate at the speed I was used to operating, and that doesn't work. So there are some people that say, no, you need to adapt your speed to the team, and I learned that it's about you cannot focus on the people that are the fastest runners in the team, but you cannot focus on the slowest either, because then you're going to slow one down. It's finding that what's the average speed that the team is, the average fastest speed that the team is able to tolerate, if you know what I mean. So I don't want to push. There are some people that were used to move at the same speed I was running. Well, maybe that was too much, but I couldn't slow down to the lowest speed because that wasn't what I was hired for, but also that would slow down the team. So finding what's the average fastest speed that the team is able to tolerate.
And what is it specifically that you needed to do to kind of find that middle ground?
Besides learning to be more patient. No, really, no. That on one hand, it's that, but also I think that sometimes we need to understand that the vision that we have and the implementation happen at different speeds. So our ability to visualize what's possible maybe goes faster than then making sure all the pieces fall into place and start moving in the right direction. So that's a first step, recognizing that for me, like that we're not moving as fast as I would, that's mean that we're not moving fast. So the second lesson is acknowledging progress, right? So sometimes if we don't see what was the starting point and we always focus on what's the end destination, then we're gonna lose the traction. Another thing, and I know it sounds like a cliche, that a focus on the journey, not the destination, it's really that change never goes as planned. Right. So, and we were taught like basic strategy is moving from point A to point B. Now I'm very mindful about telling my clients, you know what, change is going to be chaotic. You're going to see progress one day. You're going to reverse to how things used to be 3 years ago, another day. So it's going to be a back and forth process. But also in that journey, you're going to encounter and discover opportunities that you didn't see were happening. So that's the leader need to be more adaptive and less obsessed about what's the final destination.
Yeah, definitely, for sure. Oftentimes we're so fixated on sprinting to the finish line and getting that next thing accomplished, or the next goal, or the next change management piece, et cetera, et cetera. We're not focused on, being present or staying present in that moment. So to your point, I think I'm just repeating, essentially what we're looking at is being super grateful with regards to what progress we do have. And it's really about that 1% in growth, right? Week over week.
Indeed. And that connects a lot with trust, because when you get frustrated because people are not moving at a certain speed, people don't realize, the message that people get is, oh, there's lack of recognition for the improvement I'm putting into this project or change. Huh?
Tell me more from your lens. What is your take on trust in the workplace, especially where we're moving more towards hybrid or remote workplaces?
Sure. I would say, what's trust in the workplace? And I'm not talking about the definition. I'm talking, does it exist, or how much does it exist? And I think that the pandemic basically amplified both the good and the bad that was happening in different companies, right? And one thing that got basically obvious is that leaders didn't trust people. And this is something that most people don't want to address. We don't hear about this in the leadership conversation or narrative in articles or podcasts like this, etc. But it's one of the biggest challenges, that most leaders don't trust their people.
Where does that come from? Sorry to cut you off, but I'm really curious.
No.
I think it's important to talk about this. Yeah.
First of all, I think it comes from your leader didn't trust you, so you don't trust the people that when you become a leader. Second, I think that leaders believe that trust, it's a one-way kind of street, and they expect people to show that they are trustworthy, whilst they need to be the ones who model trust, right? Let's talk, for example, about company rules. That has to do with culture and also applies to remote work a lot.
Mm-hmm.
I have an example. There was a company, it still exists. It's a French manufacturing company, not a tech company, not a sexy company, but still great example,
Mm-hmm.
called Fabi. And the operators, they were operating machine to do metallurgic kind of pieces for the auto industry.
Right.
And they have a rule in place that if one of your gloves got damages, because that's what operators used to protect their hands when they were using these machines, they had to go to their supervisor, get a ticket to confirm, oh, yes, they are damaged, you need a replacement. They need to go somewhere else, show the damaged gloves, get the ticket, and then get the new pair of gloves.
Mm-hmm.
If you ask the CFO of the company how much that change costs, they say, well, a new pair of gloves is going to cost, let's say, 3-4 euros. However, the CEO realized at some point that the whole process took like over an hour, which
Right.
meant that the company was wasting 4,000 or even much more, like 34,000 of income because people weren't operating the machines
Right.
at that time. So they realized, hey, we're trying to prevent the company, we're trying to protect the company, and the cost of protecting is much expensive than the incident that we're trying to prevent. So it doesn't make sense. If people steal one pair of gloves, it costs 3 euros. The cost of protecting that from happening costs 3,000 or more. Doesn't make any sense. However, the most important lesson, going back to trust, is the leader realized that what's the message that this rule is sending to the people? Basically, the underlying belief is that people are thieves. We have to structure a process because we assume that our employees are going to steal things from the company.
Mm-hmm.
So they realize not only it's expensive, but also it sends the wrong message, so they cancel it. And that's the thing about trust. Many of the norms that exist in the workplace send messages that I don't trust you.
Mm-hmm.
Another example on the opposite side is Netflix. Netflix used to have, like every company, a booklet that specifies travel policy based on your a title, seniority, the type of meeting. You should travel a first class, a coach, whatever, no different stuff. And you should go to XYZ hotel.
Right.
At some company realized that's so complex, but also it doesn't show that we trust people. So they replace it with a very simple policy that it's do what's best for Netflix. When I share this with my clients, leaders, CEOs, they think, well, if we do that, people are going to start spending much more money. But the reality is, in the case of Netflix, their travel expenses decreased when they put all the autonomy and all the trust and
It
responsibility
was substantially, yeah.
rather than controlling them.
Mm-hmm. 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 Exactly. And I think you're nailing it in the sense that in today's landscape in the workplace, trust is really about identifying objectives or expectations from a macro perspective for your team members and allowing them to figure out their way based on their timelines. Obviously, if there's core hours within the workplace or meetings that they have to attend, common sense applies. But at the end of the day, when it comes to, things like time trackers from electronic desktops and keystrokes and stuff like that, that is really a huge deterrent, especially when it comes to that trust building piece of it. I think that there's so many other powerful ways that you can focus on strength building versus detracting from places of trust.
Absolutely. And once again, going back to how do we approach trust? When you control people and you focus on the input, how many hours people are working, how many keystrokes they are typing, then the message you're sending is you're just like a machine, rather than focus on what's the impact. So many companies were forced to work remotely in the pandemic without the resources, without the technology, without the training, and still were not only being able to keep business afloat, but actually many businesses grew and were even more profitable. So now that people have gone through that learning curve, why are when we trusted them? No, so you say, hey, when you didn't have a chance, you trusted me to work from whatever with whatever resources I had. Now that a better system is in place, why don't you trust me? Why do you need me back in the office? Or why should you be controlling if I'm typing, if I'm spending my time in front of a camera or not?
Do you think that's old habits? We're going back to the old habit or the old beliefs?
Well, it's definitely it's part a lack of trust, but on the other hand, it's about we're measuring the wrong things. So leaders are focusing on measuring the input rather than the impact, not even the
Right.
output. So are our business growing or not? What are the KPIs that we define for the team? Let's meet once a week, once a month to track team KPIs, no individual input.
I understand you for sure. And so, based on your experiences, what would be your top three things for our leaders that are listening out there that they need to hear when it comes to ensuring that there is trust in the workplace under this new-ish landscape, I guess we'll say?
Yeah, I think that the first thing is they need to revisit their own relationship with trust. We do a very
Mm,
simple activity, which is about how's your trust battery, right? So when it comes to new relationships in life, at work, in a team, some people start with the battery full, some people start with the battery empty, and some anywhere in between, right? But also there's another factor, which is how fast does your battery either fill or depletes. No, because some people start with a full battery, but the moment you make a mistake, immediately, boom, I don't trust you anymore. So that's
mm,
that's a very interesting exercise to understand how leaders deal with trust, what's their approach. And when we do this, for example, with an executive team, each team member has a different approach. So for them to start having these conversations really enlightening to say, oh wow, I didn't know that. And then share this with your team members.
mhm,
There's another element about trust, which is I mentioned like revisiting company rules.
mhm,
What are the company rules in place saying about do you trust people or not? As the examples that we just kind of reviewed, and then is leaders need to model trust. So you need to trust is a two-way street, and if you don't
mm,
like if you want people to trust you, you need to trust them first. No, so that's kind of the approach, and especially in a hybrid kind of environment in which you don't see people, you don't get to see them on a regular basis. Based on that, we always like to apply what's called the assume positive intent. And this is
mhm.
not a kumbaya, well, nice kind of stuff, but the assumptions you have about people basically many times we are reacting to things because we don't have the facts. When you assume positive intent, you pause as a leader and say, okay, I'm going to find out what really happened. So talk to the person involved, get all the facts before jumping into conclusions. And
Mhm,
also, even if people screw up, when we assume positive intent, we're elevating the bar, the expectations, so they are going to rise to that expectation. So once again, if we think people are thieves, they're going to operate like that. If we think people are good people, they're going to have to be honest and they're going to open up when they screw up.
Very insightful. I really appreciate that. So when it comes to the thought process around transparency and communication as it backs into trust in our hybrid workplaces now or remote workplaces, what comes top of mind for you? What are you seeing out there?
In Transparency is tricky because we need to first codify what does transparency mean to a particular company. No, so
Mm,
for example, Google used to be a very transparent company, and now every time they have the TGI Friday, all the meetings, people are not allowed to ask questions about the company, about the culture, about ethics. They just should focus on work. So it basically started to backfire. I always say that transparency, it's not about sharing everything because some companies feel more comfortable sharing a lot of information, some don't. However, transparency is about making sure you're not hiding critical information that people need to know
mm,
to do their jobs. So
definitely.
that's a it, then how far you want to go, it's up to you. But I always say that the obstacles that many leaders see when it comes to being more transparent can usually be overcome. So HubSpot, a marketing software company, when they always operate a very transparent kind of policy. They say that they don't have an open door policy, they have a no door policy. So for example, there's no doors in the different, they don't have offices, so there's no doors to be open. And they always share all the decisions that they're going to make with their employees before they share it with the press. In the
Hmm.
most companies happen the other way around. You acquire a new company, who gets to know first? Your PR agent before your employees. So they do it the other way around. Another interesting fact is that when they became public companies have to operate with certain constraints. So that made that a certain information could no longer be shared with people. So they basically work around the system and they turn people into insiders. So now they can still continue to access information. So what I'm saying is, when there's a will, there's a way. And if you want to be transparent, there's always a way to do this. No, another great example is what Airbnb practices, which is every time the executive team meets, and they do that on a weekly basis, all the notes from that meeting are distributed with all employees, even with interns and filters. So people know what's happening, no? And I think that's critical to build a trust. Transparency is critical to build trust, especially in a remote environment where you don't get to see your leaders. So you're always wondering what's going on, what's happening.
Definitely. And Gustavo, what would you say with regards to when it comes to leaders thinking about this? I mean, it's a great explanation with regards to transparency and what we should be doing from a tactical or strategic perspective. But what about the mindset? So how do we switch or turn that switch so that we get into the mindset of thinking more about communication, transparency for our team members?
There's one aspect that is very important when it comes to transparency. It's more about the why and less about the what. So it's not about what you share, but what's going on. So, for example, many companies went through layoffs recently, some because they had to, and many because it was a good opportunity because others were doing. So let's squeeze a little bit the cow. However, very few explain the why these are happening. So they shared facts with people, but people want to understand what's going on and why it's going on for two reasons. First, because they want to make sure that you're not hiding critical elements from the equation, but also because they want to help. Slack has a policy that they address issues in the open. So this transparency is not just to put people on the spot, but if something happening with your marketing or sales or engineering team and everyone's aware, not only we're leveling the playing ground, but also if I'm working a different team, I can share, why don't you guys think about this? In my team, we have implemented this system and we fix a similar issue. So transparency also opens the door for a cross-team collaborations because everyone knows what's going on and they can also help with their own teams.
Exactly. And when it comes to the remote workplace, there's been a lot of discussions with regards to communication and how it's shifted, so there's definitely pros and cons to remote working and communication. There's efficiencies, there's cost savings and travel, et cetera. However, what would you recommend to companies from a cultural perspective to ensure that we're still hanging on to those spaces where there can be that quote unquote water cooler talk? There still can be that connectivity.
Yeah, I think that when it comes to connection and communication, there are two critical elements. There's a talk that in the past, the belief was that collaboration, either to work on a project or to build rapport, need to happen in real time. Now, the advocates of remote first are, no, everything needs to be asynchronous. I think what's important, it's not one or the other. So we shouldn't replace a mode with the other, but basically understand what's the best approach for each. So, for example, asynchronous provides more calm, provides more time for people to reflect. So it's good for making a lot of decisions. It's good for doing solo work. It's good for doing deep work. However, when there's an emergency, real time, it's much better. So synchronous is because you get people, if you need to tackle something, the building is on fire, you're not going to send an email that people are going to read into. So you call them and say, hey guys, emergency. If you're having a huge issue with alignment or clarity or what needs to happen, getting people in real time is more effective. Building personal relationships, it's stronger to do it in real time. Like we're talking now than, hey, I'm going to send you a video and watch it next week. So finding the best of both worlds is a good way to help people connect. When it comes to connection, one thing that people sometimes get wrong, even teams that work fully remotely, they meet from time to time. It's not that they never see each other. That's a myth. But they meet with a more intentionality, and they do so, for example, what's the name? I had a blank. Well, there's a company, I'm gonna come back, that they meet on a regular basis and they bring people together to do that. Slack has a cadence depending on the nature of the team. Some teams meet on a weekly basis, some on a bi-weekly basis. So, for example, the sales team, they have to meet closely because they want to bring new people into the team and nurture them and also track what's going on. Other teams meet less regularly. Some meet in the office, some meet in the restaurant, and they spend all that time together to create bonding rather than just talk about work. And they leave the work to be discussed through other means. The other teams that get together to do a community work, for example, work on a community kitchen, help serve people food. And they don't do it on a team basis, they do it on a regional basis. So I'm going to meet with people that live close to me in the Chicago area, even if we don't get to work together. But in the end, it creates this sense of belonging that we're all part of the same company.
Amazing. And I know that we could definitely talk about these topics for hours, Gustavo. But if you had to leave our participants or listeners with one thing when it comes to culture, trust, transparency, and communication, what would it be?
You get the culture you deserve. That would be my biggest one.
I like it.
When people complain about the culture they have, I say stop looking at others and reflect on yourself and what are the signals, what are the behaviors that are modeling, and that's what you get. The same happens with parents, So you get your children behavior, it's a consequence of your actions.
I understand you for sure. And I see that there's, I believe, a new-ish book behind you, Remote, Not Distance. Tell us about that. Tell us about it. Where do we get it?
No, you can get it on Amazon or many other online retailers like Barnes and Nobles or Target or Walmart, etc. So it's available in many places, and there are different formats: digital, hardcover, and paperback.
Definitely. And if we're interested in learning more about your services, Gustavo, where can we find you? What's the best way to get a hold of you?
You can go to LinkedIn. I mean, luckily, I'm the only Gustavo Razzetti with double T there, so it's easy to find me, and I'm very active. And if not, you can go to our website, fearlessculture.design. It's not .com, it's .design. So you can learn a lot about what our services, but also we have lots of over 600 articles and free tools that you can download to start experimenting with your culture and expand on some of the topics we've been discussing. And if not, reach out there and we can talk about how we can help you.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much for your time today. We appreciate you.
My pleasure.
Take good care. Thanks for listening to the Human Side of Business podcast. I'm glad you could join us. If you enjoyed today's episode and want to stay updated with our latest content, make sure to visit our website. The link can be found in the episode description, where you can subscribe to the podcast, sign up for our newsletter, and learn more about our whole person leadership services. Sounds interesting? Explore the Whole Person Leadership Cohort by Intuitive Performance, a unique program that offers unparalleled support to managers on every step of their leadership journey. Our program features evidence-based assessments, workbooks, group coaching, and interactive learning experiences to help you level up your leadership skills. Reach out today to apply to one of our upcoming cohorts. Until next time, take care and stay curious.